What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors sits down for what should be a routine morning show interview, only to find himself under attack by a host with a hidden agenda? What you're about to witness is the moment Denzel Washington had enough of the media's games and decided to fight back, live on national television. This isn't your typical celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in standing up to journalistic bullying that left viewers across America picking sides. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below because you won't believe how this unfolds. The morning started like any other at the Good Morning America studios in Times Square. Denzel Washington, dressed impeccably in a charcoal gray suit, sat across from George Stephanopoulos in the familiar living room set that millions of Americans tune into each weekday. The cameras rolled, the red light blinked on, and what followed was anything but routine. "We're back with Academy Award winner Denzel Washington," George began, his voice carrying that practiced television smoothness. "Denzel, thank you for joining us this morning." "Good to be here, George." Denzel replied with his characteristic warm smile, settling back into the plush chair. His demeanor was relaxed, expecting the usual promotional questions about his latest project. "Now, your new film tackles some pretty heavy themes about social justice and systemic inequality," George continued, his tone already shifting slightly. "Some critics are saying you're using your platform to push a political agenda. How do you respond to that?" Denzel's eyebrows raised slightly, but his voice remained measured. "I think storytelling has always been about reflecting the human condition, George. When you see injustice, when you see people struggling, that's not political, that's human. Art has a responsibility to hold up a mirror to society. But don't you think celebrities should stay in their lane?" George pressed, leaning forward with an almost aggressive posture. "I mean, you're an actor, not a politician or a policy expert." The studio audience, which had been quietly attentive, began to sense the tension building. Denzel's smile faded just a fraction as he processed what was clearly becoming more than a friendly chat. "Stay in my lane?" Denzel repeated slowly, his voice taking on a different quality. "George, I've been in this industry for over 4 decades. I've played presidents, played preachers, played everyday people fighting for their dignity. You think I don't understand the human experience because I happen to make movies? I'm just saying that when you make statements about police brutality or institutional racism, you're venturing into areas where maybe you don't have all the facts," George shot back, his journalistic instincts seemingly overtaken by something more personal. Denzel sat up straighter, his hands clasped in front of him. "Facts? George, let me tell you about facts. I grew up in Mount Vernon, New York. I've seen things, I've lived things that maybe you haven't had to experience. When I speak about inequality, I'm not reading from a script. I'm speaking from my life. But surely you can understand how some viewers might feel that Hollywood elite telling them how to think about complex social issues might come across as, well, preachy?" George's voice carried a condescending edge that was becoming impossible to ignore. The camera caught the exact moment Denzel's expression changed. The warmth that had been there moments before was replaced by something steel-hard and focused. "Hollywood elite?" Denzel's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of decades of experience, dealing with exactly this kind of dismissive attitude. "George, I came from nothing. My father was a minister. My mother worked multiple jobs. I put myself through college. I worked my way up from the bottom. You want to talk about elite? Let's talk about the real elite, the ones who control the narrative, who decide what stories get told and which ones get buried." George shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting this level of pushback. "I think you're being a bit dramatic, Denzel." "Dramatic?" Denzel let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You know what's dramatic, George? Sitting here being lectured about staying in my lane by someone who's never walked in my shoes. You want to question my right to speak about injustice? Fine. But let's be honest about what this really island." The tension in the studio was palpable now. Crew members exchanged glances, sensing that this interview was veering far from its planned course. George, perhaps realizing he had pushed too far, attempted to regain control. "Look, I'm just trying to give you a platform to address these criticisms that are out there," he said, his tone attempting to sound reasonable. "A platform?" Denzel's voice rose slightly, his legendary composure beginning to crack. George, you invited me here to talk about my work, about a film that I'm proud of, that addresses real issues affecting real people. Instead, you're sitting here trying to diminish my voice, trying to put me in some kind of box labeled, just an actor. That's not journalism, George. That's something else entirely. The studio audience was completely silent now, transfixed by what they were witnessing. This wasn't the typical softball interview they had expected to see. This was raw, unfiltered conflict playing out in real time. George cleared his throat, clearly feeling the weight of the moment, but doubling down on his approach. Denzel, I think you're misunderstanding my questions. I'm simply trying to present the perspective that some of our viewers have expressed. Some of our viewers? Denzel's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward. George, let's cut through this. You're not presenting viewer perspectives, you're presenting your perspective. You're using this platform to try to discredit me, and frankly, I'm getting tired of it. The host's face flushed slightly, but he pressed on. I'm a journalist, Denzel. My job is to ask tough questions. Tough questions? Denzel's voice carried a dangerous edge now. George, a tough question would be asking me about the research I did for my role, about the families I spoke with who have been affected by the issues in my film. A tough question would be about the craft, about the responsibility that comes with telling these stories. What you're doing is trying to silence me. And that's something entirely different. George shifted in his seat, his media training telling him to maintain control, but his personal agenda clearly driving his next words. I'm not trying to silence anyone. But when you make sweeping statements about systemic problems in America, don't you think you have a responsibility to be balanced? Balanced? Denzel stood up slightly, his 6-foot frame seeming to fill the space between them. The camera operators quickly adjusted their shots, sensing they were capturing television history. George, you want balance? Here's balance. I've spent my entire career trying to bring dignity to characters who look like me, who come from where I come from. I've portrayed heroes, villains, and everything in between. But when I speak about real issues affecting real people, suddenly I need to be balanced? The studio was dead silent, except for the hum of the cameras. Even the production assistants had stopped what they were doing to watch this confrontation unfold. You're twisting my words, George said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Denzel's voice was razor-sharp now. George, let me ask you something. When was the last time you questioned a white actor about staying in their lane when they spoke about political issues? When was the last time you demanded balance from someone who doesn't look like me? George's mouth opened, then closed. The question hung in the air like a challenge he couldn't meet. That's what I thought, Denzel continued, his voice gaining momentum. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the system at work right here, live on television. A successful black man dares to speak about injustice, and immediately he's told to stay in his lane, to be balanced, to consider other perspectives. But those same standards don't apply to everyone, do they, George? I think you're being unfair, George protested weakly. Unfair? Denzel let out a bitter laugh. George, you know what's unfair? Having your credentials questioned every time you open your mouth about something that matters. You know what's unfair? Being told that your life experience doesn't count because you've been successful. You know what's unfair? Sitting here being lectured about balance by someone who's never had to fight for respect the way I have. The camera caught George's face, and for the first time, viewers could see genuine uncertainty in his expression. This wasn't going according to his plan. I've covered politics for decades, George said, trying to regain his footing. I understand these issues. You've covered politics, Denzel repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. George, you've reported on these issues from behind a desk, from the safety of your newsroom. I've lived them. There's a difference between understanding something intellectually and understanding it in your bones, in your soul. The tension was reaching a breaking point. Denzel was no longer the calm, diplomatic celebrity who had sat down for what should have been a routine interview. He had transformed into something more powerful, more dangerous. You want to know about my credentials? Denzel's voice was building now, approaching the eruption that viewers would be talking about for months. I'll tell you about my credentials. I've been black in America for 70 years. I've been successful in an industry that didn't want me, that told me I wasn't leading man material, that told me I should be grateful for whatever scraps I got. I've raised black children in this country, worried about them every time they left the house. Those are my credentials, George. What are yours? George was visibly struggling now, sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the studio's air conditioning. Denzel, I think we should move on to discussing your film. Oh, now you want to discuss my film? Denzel's voice was incredulous. After spending the last 10 minutes trying to tear me down, now you want to talk about my work? George, this is exactly what's wrong with media today. You bring someone on under false pretenses, you attack their character, their right to speak, and then when they fight back, suddenly you want to change the subject. The studio audience was completely transfixed. Some were nodding in agreement with Denzel's words. Others looked uncomfortable with the raw intensity of the confrontation. But no one was looking away. I wasn't attacking your character, George insisted, but his voice lacked any real conviction. Then what would you call it? Denzel shot back immediately. You questioned my intelligence, my right to speak about issues I've lived through, my credibility, my motives. If that's not an attack on character, then what is it, George? Enlighten me. George's face was flushed now, his carefully constructed television persona crumbling under Denzel's relentless questioning. I'm trying to do my job here, Denzel. Your job? Denzel's voice exploded with barely contained fury. George, your job is supposed to be informing the public, not tearing down guests who dare to speak truth to power. Your job is supposed to be asking real questions about real issues, not playing gotcha games with people who've actually lived the experiences you report on from your ivory tower. The entire studio had gone completely silent. Production assistants, camera operators, even the makeup artists who had been touching up other guests, had stopped what they were doing to watch this unprecedented confrontation unfold. I think you're overreacting, George said weakly, but his voice betrayed his growing desperation. Overreacting? Denzel stood up completely now, his full presence dominating the set. George, let me tell you what overreacting looks like. Overreacting is bringing someone onto your show under the pretense of discussing their art, then ambushing them with loaded questions designed to diminish their voice. Overreacting is using your platform to perpetuate the same systems of oppression that my film is trying to address. That's overreacting, George. The cameras captured every moment of Denzel's transformation from gracious guest to powerful force of nature. His voice carried the weight of decades of experience, of battles fought and won in an industry that had tried to limit him at every turn. You want to talk about facts, George? Here are some facts for you, Denzel continued, his voice now carrying the full authority of his legendary screen presence. Fact number 1. I've been making films about the human condition for over 40 years. Fact number 2. I've used my platform responsibly, telling stories that matter, stories that need to be told. Fact number 3. I've earned the right to speak about whatever I damn well please, not because I'm famous, but because I'm a human being with a brain and a conscience. George tried to interrupt, but Denzel was just getting started. Fact number 4. Denzel pressed on, his voice rising. You invited me here today, not to have a real conversation about important issues, but to try to put me in my place. Well, guess what, George? I don't have a place that you get to define for me. I don't have a lane that I'm supposed to stay in just because it makes you comfortable. The studio audience was completely captivated. Some were openly nodding in agreement. Others looked stunned by the raw power of what they were witnessing. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was truth being spoken in real time. Denzel, please, George pleaded, but there was no stopping the freight train of righteous anger that Denzel had become. Please what, George? Please be quiet? Please know my place? Please don't make you uncomfortable by pointing out exactly what you're doing? Denzel's voice was building to a crescendo that would echo through television history. No, George. I won't be quiet. I won't know my place. And I sure as hell won't let you use this platform to perpetuate the same ignorance and bias that people like me have been fighting against our entire lives. George looked desperately toward the control room, hoping for some kind of intervention, but the producers knew they were witnessing television gold. This was the kind of raw, unscripted moment that would be replayed for years. You know what the real tragedy is here, George? Denzel's voice dropped to a more dangerous register, somehow even more powerful than when he was shouting. The real tragedy is that you have this incredible platform, this opportunity to actually make a difference, to ask questions that matter, to elevate important conversations. Instead, you choose to use it to tear people down, to silence voices that need to be heard. The weight of his words hung in the air like a judgment. George shifted uncomfortably, sweat now visible on his brow despite the studio's carefully controlled climate. "I'm not trying to silence anyone," George managed weakly. "Then what do you call this?" Denzel gestured broadly at the set, at the cameras, at the entire situation. "You bring me on your show, you attack my credibility, you question my right to speak about issues I've lived through. And you do it all while hiding behind the pretense of journalism. That's not journalism, George. That's character assassination disguised as morning television." The studio audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Even the crew members had stopped their usual bustling activity to focus entirely on this extraordinary confrontation. "And you know what makes it even worse?" Denzel continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of his moral authority. "You're doing this to someone who has spent his entire career trying to bring dignity to the screen, trying to tell stories that matter, trying to use whatever influence he has to make the world a little bit better. But that doesn't matter to you. Does it, George? All that matters is putting the uppity black man back in his place." George's face went pale at these words. The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap, impossible to ignore or dismiss. "That's not what this is," George protested, but his voice lacked any conviction. "Isn't it?" Denzel's eyes bored into him with laser-like intensity. "Then explain to me, George. Explain to everyone watching why you felt the need to attack me from the moment I sat down. Explain why questioning injustice makes me dramatic. Explain why using my platform to speak about important issues makes me political. Explain it, George, because I'm genuinely curious to hear your reasoning." The silence that followed was deafening. George opened his mouth several times, but no words came out. He was completely exposed, his tactics laid bare for everyone to see. "That's what I thought," Denzel said quietly, but his voice carried to every corner of the studio and into the homes of millions of Americans. "You can't explain it, because there is no explanation except the one we both know is true. You saw a successful black man speaking truth, and you decided he needed to be put in his place. Well, here's a newsflash for you, George. I don't have a place except the one I make for myself." Denzel took a step closer to George, and the camera captured the full power of his presence. "I've been fighting battles like this my entire life, George. In Hollywood, in America, everywhere I go. And you know what I've learned? The people who tell you to stay in your lane are usually the ones who are most threatened by what you have to say." The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. George looked like a man who had stumbled into a fight he was completely unprepared for. "So, here's what's going to happen," Denzel continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded respect in boardrooms and on movie sets around the world. "I'm going to finish what I came here to say, and you're going to listen. And maybe, just maybe, you'll learn something about what real journalism looks like." George nodded weakly, completely deflated. "My film is about people who refuse to stay in their lane, George. It's about people who see injustice and decide to do something about it, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's dangerous, even when people like you tell them they should mind their own business. And if that makes me political, if that makes me dramatic, if that makes me anything other than what you think I should be, then so be it. Because I'd rather be authentically myself than a sanitized version that makes people comfortable." Denzel straightened his jacket and looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience at home rather than his humiliated host. "To everyone watching at home, don't let anyone tell you to stay in your lane. Don't let anyone tell you that your voice doesn't matter. And don't let anyone use their platform to diminish who you are or what you stand for." He turned back to George one final time. "Thank you for the lesson in what journalism shouldn't look like, George. It's been educational." The camera held on George's stunned face as Denzel walked off the set, leaving behind a moment of television that would be discussed, analyzed, and replayed for years to come. The host sat there, exposed and defeated, A cautionary tale about what happens when you underestimate the power of truth spoken with conviction. What did you think of Denzel's response to George's tactics? Was he right to call out the double standard, or did he go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more incredible moments like this one.